The restaurant was alive with soft music and quiet chatter. It was a high-end place where people came not just for food, but for the experience. Crystal chandeliers reflected tiny lights across the polished tables. The air smelled faintly of roses and fresh bread. Waiters moved quickly, bringing dishes and drinks with careful attention. Among them was a young waitress. She was quiet, with a gentle smile that seemed to put people at ease. She moved gracefully, but she always kept her head down, focused on her work. That evening, the restaurant was busier than usual. A group of well-dressed people had booked the large corner table, and everyone seemed to watch them with subtle curiosity. The leader of the group was a wealthy man, known in the city for his money and his power. He had a presence that made people notice him the moment he entered. His suit was expensive, his shoes polished to shine, and his watch sparkled under the lights. But along with his appearance came a sharp edge. People around him often felt the weight of his ego. The young waitress noticed him immediately. She had served many guests before, some rich, some famous, but there was something about him that made the room shift slightly. He had a way of looking at people that made them feel small without saying a word. She tried to steady her nerves, reminding herself that she had been working in restaurants for years. She had handled demanding customers, but tonight felt different. As she approached the table to take their order, he gave a quick glance at her, almost like a test. "Are you sure you know what you're doing?" he said, not as a question, but as a challenge. His voice was calm but had a hint of mockery. The young waitress nodded politely, keeping her voice steady. "Yes, sir. I'll make sure everything is perfect." She tried to smile, but she could feel his eyes measuring her confidence. His friends laughed quietly at something he said, but the wealthy man's attention stayed on her. He leaned back in his chair, crossing one leg over the other, and watched her as she moved away to write down their order. She could feel the tension building, but she reminded herself that she was capable. She had dealt with worse. People often judged by appearances, but she had learned not to let that shake her. As she served them their drinks, he made a small, mocking comment about her uniform. It wasn't loud, but it was enough for her to hear. "You don't look like someone who belongs here," he said with a smirk. The other guests didn't seem to notice, but she felt a chill run down her spine. She forced herself to breathe slowly and smile politely. "Thank you, sir. I'll make sure your experience is excellent tonight." The wealthy man chuckled softly, clearly enjoying the small discomfort he caused. He leaned forward slightly, resting his elbow on the table. "I've seen a lot of restaurants and a lot of waiters," he said. "But something about you, it's amusing." His tone was playful, but it carried a sting. He was trying to put her in her place. The young waitress felt the eyes of the other diners on her, but she focused on staying composed. She knew that reacting angrily would only make the situation worse. She moved to serve their appetizers, trying to keep her movements smooth and professional. Each step she took, she reminded herself to breathe and stay calm. She had faced rude customers before, but this man's arrogance was different. It wasn't just impatience or a bad mood. It was a deliberate display of power. But she refused to let him see fear or frustration. Her hands moved steadily as she placed plates in front of them, careful to avoid any mistakes. The wealthy man made another comment, this time about her posture. "You should stand taller," he said, still smiling in that way that made it clear he thought he was clever. The young waitress nodded politely, taking a small step back. Inside, her heart was racing, but she kept her expression neutral. She reminded herself that she had survived challenges before, and that this would be no different. Despite the mocking tone, something inside her stirred, a quiet determination. She wasn't going to let his words define her. She had talents, skills, and a sense of dignity that no one could take away. As she continued to serve their table, she felt a small spark of confidence growing. This man may have tried to intimidate her, but he didn't know the full story. She had strengths he couldn't see at first glance. Other staff members watched from a distance, sensing the tension but unsure how to intervene. Some whispered to each other, wondering if she could handle the pressure. But she didn't need anyone's reassurance. She had faced challenges alone before, and she trusted herself to remain composed. Every step she took, every plate she carried, was a reminder of her ability to stay calm under pressure. The wealthy man seemed to notice her resolve. His smirk wavered slightly, replaced by curiosity. He leaned back in his chair again, watching her with a more critical eye. "Interesting," he muttered almost to himself. It was the first sign that he might be underestimating her in more ways than one. She moved through the restaurant with care, checking on other tables while keeping an eye on the wealthy man's group. She took orders, refilled glasses, and ensured every guest was comfortable. Her hands moved with practiced ease, and her voice remained calm and polite. She was doing her job, but there was an inner strength she didn't even need to show. It was simply there. As the night progressed, the wealthy man continued to make small jabs, each designed to provoke a reaction. But she met each one with quiet grace. Her composure seemed to puzzle him. He wasn't used to people responding with calm confidence to his attempts at mockery. Most people would flinch, apologize, or become flustered. But she didn't. She simply continued to do her work, giving each guest attention and care. At one point, he leaned forward, his elbows on the table, and spoke in a lower, more deliberate tone. "I've been to many restaurants and I've seen a lot of talent," he said, glancing at her. "But I wonder, do you really belong here?" His words were meant to sting, but she felt a quiet smile touch her lips. Inside, she knew something he didn't. She had more to offer than he could imagine. She moved past him, carrying a tray with desserts, each step measured and confident. The clinking of glasses and soft footsteps filled the room, but she focused only on the tasks at hand. Her mind was calm, her focus sharp. She wasn't going to give him the satisfaction of seeing her rattled. She had faced difficult situations before, and this was just another test of her patience and strength. By the end of the first hour, the wealthy man seemed slightly frustrated. His comments were sharper now, trying harder to provoke her. But she remained composed, responding with polite smiles and professional courtesy. She could feel the admiration of some of the other diners, who were quietly impressed by her calm demeanor. She didn't notice them. She was too focused on keeping control of the situation. Then, as she cleared the last plates from their table, she noticed something that made her pause for a moment. A small glint in the corner of the room. It was a grand piano, shining under the soft lights. For a moment, she allowed herself a small thought. Maybe there was a way to show them something they couldn't mock. Something she could do that would speak louder than words. But she pushed the thought aside for now, focusing on finishing her service. The wealthy man leaned back, watching her with a curious expression. He seemed to sense that there was something different about her, though he couldn't yet place it. Most people he encountered were easy to intimidate, but she was different. She carried herself with a quiet dignity that made him pause, even if just for a moment. As she walked back to the staff area, she felt a mixture of nerves and excitement. Something was about to happen. She could feel it, though she didn't yet know what. The wealthy man's group continued their conversation, but his eyes kept flicking toward her. She kept her head down, smiling politely at passing staff members, preparing herself for whatever might come next. She knew this was just the beginning. There was more to this evening than serving drinks and food. She had a feeling that her life was about to intersect with this wealthy man in a way that would change everything. She couldn't see the future, but she felt a spark of courage that told her she could face whatever was coming. And as the soft music played in the background and the chandeliers reflected their warm glow across the room, she prepared herself for the moment that could define the night. The wealthy man had no idea that the quiet, diligent waitress he thought he could mock was about to surprise him, and everyone else in the room, in a way he could never imagine. The evening had settled into a quiet rhythm after the initial tension. Guests were enjoying their meals, waiters moved gracefully between tables, and the soft background music played over the gentle hum of conversation. The young waitress had returned to the staff area to refill trays and catch her breath. Her heart was still racing from the wealthy man's mocking comments, but there was a quiet determination growing inside her. She knew she had a chance to turn the night around, though she didn't yet know how. From the corner of her eye, she kept noticing the grand piano. It gleamed under the soft lights, polished to a mirror shine. She had seen it before, of course, but tonight it seemed different, almost calling out to her. She had played piano for years in private, practicing whenever she could find time between school, work, and life's responsibilities. No one at the restaurant knew this. She had never shared her talent publicly. It was her secret, a part of herself she kept hidden. But something about tonight felt like the right moment to reveal it. Meanwhile, the wealthy man was finishing his wine, his group chatting quietly around him. He seemed content for a moment, yet his eyes kept drifting toward the young waitress. There was a flicker of curiosity in his expression, mixed with his usual arrogance. He leaned back in his chair and, without warning, called out to her. "Come here. Play for us," he said, his tone mocking but firm. The words froze her for a moment. Every instinct in her told her this was dangerous territory. This man was trying to embarrass her, to prove some point about superiority. But alongside the fear, another feeling rose. A spark of courage. She had worked hard, and she had a skill he could not belittle. Slowly, she nodded, setting down the tray she was carrying. Her hands trembled slightly, but she lifted her chin and walked toward the piano. The wealthy man smirked, clearly confident she would fail. He gestured toward the instrument. "Let's see if you can actually do something right," he said, chuckling. The people around him laughed softly, expecting the same humiliation they had enjoyed before. The young waitress paused by the piano, her fingers hovering over the keys. Her heart beat fast, but her mind cleared. She took a deep breath, letting the nervous energy settle into focus. The first note rang out. It was soft, delicate, almost tentative, but perfectly in tune. She began with a simple melody, one that eased her into the performance while calming the audience. At first, the wealthy man's smirk remained. He leaned back, arms crossed, still confident that any misstep would give him the victory he sought. But then, as the music unfolded, something unexpected happened. The melody grew richer, more intricate, flowing through the restaurant like a warm current. Her fingers moved with surprising speed and precision, each note resonating perfectly. The guests, who had been murmuring quietly, fell silent. They watched, captivated, as the waitress transformed from a quiet server into a musician whose presence commanded attention. The wealthy man's smirk faltered. His eyes widened slightly, and he leaned forward, almost involuntarily. He had expected embarrassment, perhaps a laugh or a glance at her flustered expression. But this was something else entirely. The music was beautiful, moving, and confident. It spoke of hours of practice, dedication, and hidden talent that no one had imagined. Other waiters paused in their work, watching from the sidelines. Some whispered to each other in astonishment, barely able to believe what they were hearing. The melodies seemed to float through the air, touching everyone's ears and hearts alike. The young waitress, lost in the music, didn't notice the attention she was drawing. She played with a calm focus, her soul speaking through her fingers. Each note carried emotion, and each pause held meaning. The wealthy man, for the first time that evening, felt a flicker of uncertainty. He had expected mockery, not mastery. He tried to regain composure, but the effect of the music was undeniable. Guests at nearby tables turned toward the piano, curious. Some of the other diners even stopped mid-conversation, captivated by the unexpected performance. What had been a display of arrogance was now a showcase of talent that none of them could ignore. The young waitress continued, moving into more complex pieces. Her confidence grew with each note, and so did the attention of the audience. She played a melody that was gentle and soft, then transitioned into something vibrant and full of life. The music seemed to tell a story of resilience, determination, and quiet strength. Guests were moved, some leaning forward in their seats, eyes wide with admiration. The wealthy man sat frozen for a moment, realizing he had underestimated her. His smug expression disappeared, replaced by something closer to astonishment. He had expected her to falter, to be embarrassed in front of everyone, but she was captivating them with her skill and grace. The irony was not lost on him. He had tried to belittle her, but she had turned the situation around completely. By the time the performance reached its crescendo, the entire restaurant was silent. No one dared interrupt or even breathe too loudly. The young waitress, completely absorbed in her music, didn't notice the effect she was having. Each note was deliberate, confident, and full of emotion. She had transformed the moment from one of potential humiliation into a celebration of talent. Finally, as she played the last chord, the restaurant erupted into applause. Guests clapped enthusiastically, some standing to show their appreciation. The wealthy man, caught off guard, could only sit in stunned silence. He had expected to dominate, to mock, and perhaps to humiliate. Instead, he was witnessing a performance that left him speechless. His group looked at him, unsure how to react, while other diners showered the young waitress with admiration. The young waitress slowly rose from the piano bench, her hands shaking slightly but her expression calm. She had done it. She had faced the challenge, played her heart out, and proved her talent to an audience that had doubted her. She returned to the staff area quietly, giving a small nod to the other waiters who had watched in awe. No words were needed. The message was clear. She had conquered the moment with dignity and grace. The wealthy man, finally finding his voice, attempted to speak, but his words faltered. He wanted to say something clever, something to regain control of the situation, but nothing came. He realized that the power dynamic had shifted completely. He had tried to mock her, but she had turned the tables with skill, confidence, and poise. The realization was humbling, and for the first time that evening, he felt a twinge of respect. Guests continued to applaud, some even approaching her to compliment her performance. "That was incredible," one said quietly. "I had no idea you could play like that." She smiled politely, thanking them, but her eyes remained humble. She wasn't seeking attention or praise. She had simply shared a part of herself that she had kept hidden, and it had resonated with everyone in the room. Her colleagues watched, inspired. They had known her as a hardworking, quiet waitress, but now they saw a new dimension of her. She had faced intimidation with calm, transformed a potentially humiliating situation into a moment of triumph, and left a lasting impression on everyone present. The energy in the restaurant had shifted. What had started as an evening dominated by arrogance had become one of admiration, respect, and awe. Even the wealthy man who had come to belittle her had to acknowledge her talent. He nodded slightly, a silent recognition of her skill. He no longer looked for an opportunity to mock her. Instead, he watched with a quiet, grudging respect, realizing that some qualities, like talent, courage, and grace, could not be diminished by arrogance or wealth. As the evening continued, she returned to her duties, carrying plates and refilling glasses with the same professionalism as before, but with a newfound confidence. She had faced a challenge she never anticipated, and she had succeeded not through confrontation or anger, but through her own skill and calm determination. She had shown the room, and even the wealthy man, that true strength often lies in quiet confidence and unassuming talent. By the end of the night, the performance had become the talk of the restaurant. Guests mentioned it to each other, recalling how a simple waitress had captivated them with her piano playing. The wealthy man left the restaurant in silence, no longer the dominating figure he had hoped to be, but rather someone who had learned, in his own way, that humility and respect could emerge in the most unexpected moments. The young waitress, exhausted but exhilarated, took a deep breath as she cleaned the last table of the night. She had faced ridicule, performed under pressure, and emerged victorious. For the first time, she allowed herself to feel pride, not arrogance, but quiet pride in her talent, her composure, and her courage. She had turned an ordinary night into an unforgettable experience, not just for the guests, but for herself. And though the night was over, she knew that her life was changing. The piano, the performance, and the courage she had found within herself would remain a part of her story. She had learned that even in the face of mockery and doubt, she could shine. She had faced a test she never expected, and she had passed it with grace. The applause from the last note still echoed softly in the restaurant, but the young waitress didn't step away from the piano. Something inside her had shifted. She had seen the surprise and admiration in the eyes of the guests, and she felt a quiet thrill. It was no longer just about facing the wealthy man or proving herself. It was about sharing a piece of her soul, showing everyone that a simple act could carry emotion, skill, and courage. She looked at the keys in front of her. For years, they had been a place where she could escape, a secret world where her thoughts and feelings flowed freely. Tonight, the piano wasn't just an instrument. It was a bridge connecting her to people she had never met. She felt her fingers dance over the keys, creating a soft, melodic tune that drew the audience closer. Each note was precise but full of warmth, carrying a sense of calm and beauty that seemed to fill the room. Guests leaned forward in their seats. The wealthy man, who had been reclining confidently just minutes ago, now sat upright. His arms folded across his chest in a way that betrayed both surprise and curiosity. He had expected her to falter under pressure, to play something simple and unremarkable. Instead, what he heard was a performance that was moving, complex, and impossible to ignore. The waitress's melody grew richer, flowing seamlessly from one chord to another. She played a piece she had written herself, something personal and emotional, full of life and longing. Each note told a story without words. The guests listened in silence, completely absorbed by the music. Some had never heard a piano played with such depth and feeling in their lives. They felt as if the music had reached inside them, touching memories and emotions they had long forgotten. The wealthy man tried to hide his astonishment, but it was futile. He leaned closer to the table, resting his chin in his hand, his eyes fixed on her fingers as they moved effortlessly across the keys. He had always thought that wealth and influence could dominate any room, that power alone could make people bend. But tonight, he realized that talent, courage, and grace were forces far stronger than arrogance. She continued to play, moving into a faster, more dynamic section. Her fingers moved like lightning, striking the keys with confidence and control. The notes danced across the room, filling every corner with music that was both precise and passionate. Guests watched in amazement, some holding their hands over their mouths in disbelief. The wealthy man's group exchanged glances, unsure of what to say. The power in the room had shifted completely. Other staff members had stopped in their tracks. They had known her as a quiet, hard-working waitress, but they had never seen this side of her. They whispered to each other, amazed at the skill, emotion, and poise she displayed. It was as if the restaurant had transformed into a concert hall, with the young waitress at its center. She was no longer just serving food. She was telling a story that everyone could feel. The wealthy man's expression softened slightly, though he tried not to show it. He had come to assert dominance, to mock and belittle, but he had been disarmed by something far beyond his expectations. The music didn't just fill the room. It filled the hearts of everyone present. It demanded respect, attention, and admiration. He realized that he had underestimated her entirely, and for the first time, he felt a sense of humility creeping in. As the performance continued, the young waitress's confidence grew. She had feared ridicule, but now the fear was gone, replaced by a pure joy in sharing her talent. Each note was deliberate, full of intention, and yet effortless. She allowed herself to move with the rhythm, letting the music guide her. Her eyes occasionally flicked toward the wealthy man, who was now watching silently, captivated and speechless. The melody shifted again, becoming slower and more reflective. She played with a softness that made the listeners lean closer, as if afraid to break the spell. The music spoke of patience, struggle, and quiet triumph. Every chord, every pause carried meaning. It was a performance that required not just skill but heart, and the young waitress gave it fully. She had never felt so alive, so connected to both the music and the audience. Guests whispered to each other, some fighting back tears. They had come expecting a quiet dinner, perhaps some light entertainment, but instead, They were witnessing a transformation. The restaurant had become a space where a simple waitress could command attention not through wealth or status, but through pure talent and courage. The wealthy man's group began to realize that this was not just a performance. It was a revelation. They had tried to assert superiority, but they were now mere spectators to something extraordinary. One by one, they exchanged looks of surprise, some nodding subtly in appreciation. The young waitress had completely turned the situation on its head, proving that skill, determination, and heart mattered more than arrogance. The young waitress's hands moved faster, her fingers striking the keys with precision. The music soared, filling the restaurant with a rhythm that made the air itself seem to vibrate. Guests sat in awe, mesmerized by the combination of technical mastery and emotional depth. She was no longer nervous. She was in her element. The piano had become an extension of herself, a voice for emotions she had long kept private. The wealthy man tried to maintain his composure, but it was impossible. He had expected to dominate, to control, and to mock. Instead, he was humbled by her talent, moved by her courage, and impressed by her poise. He realized, perhaps for the first time, that some qualities could not be bought or imposed. They had to be earned, nurtured, and expressed honestly. As the performance reached its climax, the music became a whirlwind of emotion. Her fingers moved in a blur, creating a harmony that was both intricate and powerful. Guests clapped softly in time with the rhythm, unable to contain their admiration. Some were on the edge of their seats, completely captivated. Even other staff members were drawn closer, watching in silent wonder. Finally, she brought the piece to a gentle close. The last note lingered in the air, resonating with a depth that made the room feel still and alive at the same time. For a brief moment, no one spoke. The silence was filled with awe, respect, and the realization that they had witnessed something extraordinary. Then, slowly, the applause began. It started quietly, with one or two guests clapping, and then grew into a wave of appreciation. People stood, some cheering, some whistling softly. The wealthy man clapped too, though his hands moved slowly, as if still processing the unexpected turn of events. His arrogance had melted into admiration. He had tried to belittle her, but she had turned the night into a triumph that no one could ignore. Guests approached her, praising her talent. "That was incredible," one said. "I had no idea you could play like that." She smiled, humbly nodding, but she felt a quiet pride inside. She had faced a challenge she had never imagined, and she had risen above it, not through confrontation, but through her own skill and courage. The wealthy man, though initially taken aback, finally spoke. "You have an amazing talent," he said quietly, almost reluctantly. There was no mockery in his voice now, only recognition. It was the first time he had truly acknowledged her abilities, and the admission seemed to surprise even him. Other diners whispered among themselves, recounting what they had just seen. The young waitress had taken a situation that could have been humiliating and transformed it into a moment of inspiration. Her performance had not only captured the attention of everyone in the restaurant, but had also changed the energy of the room entirely. She returned to her station quietly, letting the applause settle. She felt exhilarated but calm, proud but humble. She had shared something personal and meaningful, and it had resonated with people in ways she had never imagined. Her heart was full, and she knew that this night would be remembered by many. The wealthy man watched her from across the room, still impressed despite himself. He had tried to assert control, to dominate, and to belittle, but she had done something far more powerful. She had commanded respect, admiration, and awe, all through her own talent and grace. It was a lesson he would not forget. The young waitress moved gracefully, refilling glasses and checking on other guests, but there was a new lightness in her step. She had discovered something important, not just about her talent, but about herself. She could face challenges, rise above intimidation, and shine, even in situations where others tried to diminish her. By the end of the night, the restaurant was buzzing with conversation about her performance. Guests spoke in hushed tones, praising her skill and composure. The wealthy man left quietly, thoughtful, carrying with him the realization that some qualities, talent, courage, and integrity, could not be mocked or bought. The young waitress, exhausted but exhilarated, took a deep breath as she cleaned the last table. She had faced ridicule, transformed a moment of potential humiliation into triumph, and emerged stronger, braver, and more confident. The piano, the music, and her courage had created a memory that would last far beyond that night. And as she closed the restaurant doors, the glow from the chandeliers fading behind her, she knew this was only the beginning. There were more challenges ahead, but she had proven to herself, and to everyone watching, that talent, heart, and courage could change the course of any night, any moment, and any life. The restaurant had finally settled after the thunderous applause. Guests were still murmuring excitedly to each other, replaying the young waitress's performance in their minds. The atmosphere had completely changed. What had begun as an evening dominated by the wealthy man's arrogance had transformed into something entirely different, something unforgettable. The soft glow of the chandeliers reflected off the polished tables, and the faint smell of roses and fresh bread lingered in the air, mingling with the sense of awe that now filled the room. The young waitress returned to her station, trying to appear calm and professional, but inside, her heart was still racing. She felt a mix of exhilaration and disbelief. She had just turned a potentially humiliating moment into a triumph that no one could ignore. She took a deep breath, steadying herself as she refilled glasses and cleared dishes, reminding herself to stay composed. Her hands moved smoothly, but her mind replayed the applause, the looks of astonishment on the guests' faces, and the brief moment when even the wealthy man had been caught off guard. The wealthy man sat at his table, silent, his expression unreadable. He had watched her every move, expecting failure, expecting embarrassment, and instead, he had been confronted with something far greater than he anticipated. He had tried to assert power, to mock, but it had backfired. The young waitress had risen above his attempts to intimidate her, and the reality of that was slowly sinking in. For the first time that evening, he felt a twinge of humility. He glanced at the guests around him. Some were still clapping, others whispering in amazement, and a few had even stood to give their full attention to the young waitress. He realized that the evening had shifted completely. The power he thought he held had been replaced by admiration for her talent and composure. He had assumed that wealth and influence were enough to command respect, but she had shown him that true respect was earned through skill, courage, and heart. The young waitress moved back toward the piano, drawn by the lingering energy of the room. She could feel the eyes of the guests following her, not with judgment, but with admiration. She hesitated for a moment, considering whether to play again. She didn't want to appear boastful, but there was an opportunity here to fully express herself, to share the music that had carried her through so many challenges in life. With a quiet resolve, she placed her fingers on the keys and began to play once more. This time, the music was different. It was slower, softer, and more introspective. She poured emotion into each note, letting the melody flow naturally, unrestrained by expectation. Guests leaned forward, captivated once more by the depth of her performance. The wealthy man, despite himself, could not look away. His eyes followed her every movement, and his expression softened further. He had never seen someone command attention purely through talent, humility, and presence. As she played, she remembered moments from her life, hours of practice alone in a quiet room, the support of family and friends who had encouraged her, and the challenges she had faced while working hard to survive and pursue her dreams. Each note carried a piece of her journey, her struggles, and her triumphs. The audience could feel it, even if they did not know the story behind the music. Her emotions were transparent through the piano, resonating with everyone who listened. Other staff members, who had been watching from a distance, were now openly moved. Some whispered to each other, unable to believe the transformation they had witnessed in their quiet, diligent colleague. She had taken a night that could have been humiliating and turned it into a celebration of courage and talent. They admired her not just for her skill but for the strength she had shown in standing tall in the face of mockery. The wealthy man shifted in his seat, his arms uncrossed now, hands resting loosely on the table. He was silent, reflecting on what had just happened. The smug arrogance that had marked him throughout the evening had dissipated, replaced by an unexpected sense of respect. He realized that he had underestimated her completely. She had not only performed flawlessly but had also maintained her composure, dignity, and humility throughout. That combination was more powerful than anything money or influence could command. Guests began to approach her, offering words of praise. "That was remarkable," one said. "I've never seen anything like it." Another added, "You should play professionally. Your talent is incredible." She smiled politely, accepting the compliments with humility, but her mind was focused on the impact of the moment itself. She had done more than play music. She had changed the energy of the room, shifted perceptions, and reminded everyone that courage and talent were forces to be respected. The wealthy man finally spoke, his voice calm and measured. "I must admit I did not expect that," he said. His words were honest, lacking the mockery that had defined him earlier. There was an acknowledgement of her skill, a subtle but clear admission that she had surprised him. He had intended to humiliate, but instead he had been humbled. The room seemed to hold its breath as he continued. "You have a gift. Not many people can face pressure and perform with such grace." Her expression remained composed, but inside, she felt a quiet warmth. She had faced a daunting challenge and emerged stronger. The recognition from someone who had tried to belittle her was not the most important part. What mattered most was the realization that she could trust herself, rely on her skill, and rise above adversity. The wealthy man's words were a reflection of that inner strength, but the true triumph had been hers all along. The other guests were still talking among themselves, replaying the performance in their minds. Some discussed the technical mastery, others the emotion conveyed, and a few simply marveled at the courage it must have taken to play under such scrutiny. It was clear that the young waitress had left a lasting impression on everyone present. Her talent had not only entertained but had inspired. Meanwhile, the wealthy man was silent for a moment, deep in thought. He had come to the restaurant expecting to dominate, to show power, and perhaps to humiliate someone he deemed inferior. But he had been confronted with something far greater: humility, talent, and courage embodied in a young woman he had underestimated. The realization unsettled him in a way he had never experienced. He had learned a lesson that money and influence could not teach. Respect must be earned, and talent and courage demand acknowledgement. As the night continued, the young waitress returned to her duties, carrying herself with a quiet confidence that had not been there before. Each step she took was measured, professional, and calm. She moved among the tables, refilling drinks and clearing plates, but the energy in her movements had changed. She walked with the knowledge that she had faced an extraordinary challenge and succeeded. The room seemed to respond to her presence differently now. Guests who had initially ignored her now offered warm smiles, some even waving to get her attention and praise her. Her colleagues, inspired by her performance, began to speak in hushed tones. They admired her bravery, her talent, and her ability to remain composed under pressure. Some even expressed envy, not in a negative way, but in the sense that they wished they could have the same courage to stand tall in difficult moments. The young waitress had become an example of resilience and grace, not just through her music but through the way she carried herself. The wealthy man finally rose from his seat, signaling that he and his group were preparing to leave. He approached her, this time without the smirk that had defined his behavior earlier. "You have talent beyond what I imagined," he said quietly. "I misjudged you, and I apologize. That was extraordinary." His tone was sincere, and there was a sense of humility in his words that had been entirely absent before. The guests around them murmured their approval, sensing that the acknowledgement carried real weight. She nodded politely, accepting the apology with grace. Her response was simple but meaningful. "Thank you, sir. I'm glad you enjoyed it." There was no triumph in her voice, no boastfulness. She had done her part, and now it was enough to leave the moment with dignity. The wealthy man nodded, seemingly processing the encounter, and then he and his group walked toward the exit, leaving behind a room full of inspired guests and amazed staff. Once the door closed, the restaurant felt different. The energy was lighter, warmer, and filled with a sense of possibility. The young waitress stood quietly for a moment, letting the experience sink in. She had faced intimidation, played under pressure, and emerged not only unscathed but triumphant. The realization brought a sense of calm joy that spread through her entire being. She had proven to herself that courage and skill could overcome arrogance, and that humility paired with talent could command true respect. Guests continued to discuss the performance long after the wealthy man left. Some praised the music itself, while others marveled at the bravery it must have taken to play under such scrutiny. The young waitress moved through the tables with calm professionalism, answering questions politely and offering smiles, but her mind lingered on the fact that she had transformed the night into something unforgettable. Her talent had been acknowledged, her courage had been recognized, and her dignity had remained intact throughout. By the time the restaurant began to close for the night, the young waitress felt a profound sense of accomplishment. She had faced a challenge that could have embarrassed her, but instead, she had turned it into an opportunity to shine. Her life felt subtly different now, imbued with a quiet confidence that came from knowing she could rise to any occasion, no matter how intimidating. The experience had not only changed the perception of the guests and the wealthy man, but it had also changed her perception of herself. She realized that moments of fear could be transformed into triumphs through courage, skill, and grace. The piano had become a symbol of her resilience, a reminder that even in the face of mockery or doubt, she could rise above and leave a lasting impact. As she cleaned the final tables and prepared to leave, she reflected on the night. It had been more than a performance. It had been a revelation. She had faced ridicule, turned it into respect, and discovered a new sense of strength within herself. The experience would stay with her forever, a story of courage, talent, and dignity that could inspire not only herself but anyone who witnessed it. The young waitress stepped out into the cool night air, the city lights glowing softly around her. She felt lighter, freer, and more alive than she had in a long time. She had confronted arrogance with grace, transformed mockery into admiration, and discovered the power that comes from staying true to oneself. The piano, the music, and the courage she had found within herself had changed the course of one evening, but they had also changed her forever. The days following that unforgettable evening at the restaurant were unlike anything the young waitress had ever experienced. Word of her piano performance spread quickly. Guests who had witnessed it talked about it to friends, colleagues, and family. Social media posts mentioned the restaurant, describing the quiet waitress who had surprised everyone with her incredible talent. Even the restaurant staff found themselves speaking of her performance with awe. It was clear that one night of courage had created ripples far beyond what she had imagined. She arrived at work the next day, expecting a normal shift, and yet the atmosphere was different. Her colleagues greeted her with smiles and whispered admiration. "I heard about last night," one said softly. "You were amazing. I didn't know you could play like that." Another nodded. "You really stole the show. I'm proud to work with you." She smiled quietly, humbled by their praise, but inside she felt a quiet sense of accomplishment. For the first time, she realized that people could see her for more than just the uniform she wore. The wealthy man, whose attempt to humiliate her had inadvertently led to her triumph, became a frequent topic of conversation among the staff. Some wondered if he would return to the restaurant, curious to see her perform again. Others speculated about whether he would ever recognize her skill publicly. The young waitress herself tried not to dwell on it. She knew that her talent was now known, but she also knew that it was her dedication, humility, and courage that had made the performance memorable. Talent alone was not enough. It was the way she had carried herself that made the difference. A few days later, the restaurant manager approached her with a smile. "I need to talk to you," he said. She followed him to a quiet corner, expecting perhaps some kind of praise, but she was still unsure of what he wanted. "Last night, you changed the way people see this place," he began. "You didn't just perform. You inspired everyone." Guests are still talking about you, and honestly, we've never seen anything like it. I think it's time we offered you more opportunities." Her heart skipped a beat. She had always loved her job, but she had never imagined it could open doors like this. The manager continued, "We want to let you perform here regularly. Maybe even have small showcases during special dinners. Your talent shouldn't stay hidden, and I think our guests deserve to see it." She nodded, feeling a mixture of pride, gratitude, and excitement. It was an opportunity she had never dared to imagine. The young waitress also noticed a change in how the guests treated her. People who had once ignored her now smiled warmly, some even asking if she would play a song during their meal. The atmosphere of the restaurant shifted as well. Where once there had been quiet efficiency and polite service, now there was a sense of anticipation whenever she approached the piano. Her presence brought not just service, but a kind of artistry that people had not expected. News of her performance even reached local music teachers and event organizers. They contacted the restaurant, asking if she would be willing to perform at private events, weddings, and local gatherings. It seemed that one night of courage had opened doors she had never thought possible. She considered the opportunities carefully. While she loved her work as a waitress, she realized that music had become a central part of her life in a way she could no longer ignore. Even the wealthy man returned to the restaurant, though this time he approached differently. He did not arrive to mock or belittle. Instead, he observed from a distance, clearly interested in seeing her perform again. When their eyes met briefly, he gave a small nod, a silent acknowledgement of the talent and grace he had underestimated. It was a moment of quiet respect. He had come to recognize that some lessons, like humility and appreciation for true skill, could not be bought. As weeks passed, her life began to change in subtle but meaningful ways. She continued her work at the restaurant, but now with a renewed sense of purpose and confidence. She had proven to herself that she could face adversity, rise above it, and leave a lasting impact. The piano had become not just a secret skill, but a symbol of her resilience and courage. She found herself practicing even more, eager to refine her craft and explore the depth of her talent. Her colleagues continued to support her. Some asked for lessons, wanting to learn even a fraction of what she could do. Others simply offered encouragement, admiring the way she had handled herself. The young waitress realized that her courage had inspired not just guests, but the people she worked with every day. It was a reminder that bravery and talent could influence others in ways far beyond personal achievement. One evening, the wealthy man approached her after she had finished a performance for a small group of guests. "I wanted to personally congratulate you," he said, his voice calm and sincere. "I came expecting to dominate and leave an impression, but you have shown something far greater. Talent, courage, humility. It's rare, and it commands respect. I misjudged you, and I'm glad I did. It gave me the chance to witness something extraordinary." Her response was modest, but heartfelt. "Thank you. I didn't play for anyone but the music itself. I'm glad it could touch others too." There was no arrogance in her voice, only quiet confidence and humility. The wealthy man nodded, clearly impressed, and left with a newfound respect that went beyond words. It was a small but significant moment, a reminder that recognition often comes from those we least expect. The young waitress began to receive invitations to perform outside the restaurant as well. Local events, private gatherings, and small community concerts asked for her presence. At first, she was hesitant. She had worked hard to maintain a balance between her responsibilities and her passion. But she realized that music had become a path she could no longer ignore. Accepting these invitations felt like a natural step forward, a way to embrace her talent fully and share it with a wider audience. With each performance, she grew more confident. Her fingers moved with ease, her expressions conveyed emotion, and her connection with the audience deepened. She learned that music was not just about notes and technique. It was about communication, storytelling, and heart. Each time she played, she carried with her the lessons of that night, the power of courage, the strength of humility, and the importance of trusting oneself in the face of doubt. The wealthy man, though not always present, occasionally returned to witness her growth. He had learned a subtle but important lesson about respect, talent, and the impact of underestimating others. Each time he saw her perform, he gained a deeper understanding of what true skill and grace looked like. He no longer saw himself as a figure of dominance in her world. Instead, he became an observer quietly, acknowledging the power of courage and dedication. Over time, the young waitress's story became a source of inspiration for others. Friends, colleagues, and even strangers spoke of her journey. They admired not just her music, but the strength and resilience she had shown in a difficult moment. She had faced mockery, performed under pressure, and emerged victorious. Not through confrontation, but through talent, calm, and determination. Her story reminded people that the quietest individuals often possess the greatest strength, and that courage can turn even the most intimidating moments into triumph. Despite all the attention, she remained humble. She continued to work at the restaurant, serve guests, and perform when the opportunity arose. She never let recognition change her core values or the way she treated others. Her focus remained on the music, the joy of sharing it, and the quiet satisfaction of knowing she had faced a challenge and succeeded. It was a balance she cherished, blending work, passion, and personal growth in a way that felt natural and fulfilling. The wealthy man eventually stopped coming regularly, but the impression he left stayed with her. His initial arrogance and eventual respect became part of the story she carried with her. A reminder that people can change, that assumptions can be overturned, and that courage and talent have the power to transform situations in unexpected ways. She often reflected on that night, recognizing it as the turning point in her life, the moment when her quiet strength and hidden skill became visible to the world. Months later, she was invited to perform at a small charity event. The audience was larger than the restaurant, and she felt a familiar flutter of nerves. But she remembered the lessons of that night: the calm focus, the courage to face doubt, and the trust in her own abilities. As her fingers touched the keys, she felt the same sense of connection and purpose that had carried her through the unforgettable evening. The music flowed effortlessly, captivating the audience and leaving them in awe, just as it had before. Her life had changed, but not in ways she had expected. She had gained recognition, new opportunities, and respect, but she had also gained confidence, courage, and a deeper understanding of her own abilities. The young waitress who had once been quiet and overlooked had become a symbol of talent, resilience, and grace. She had shown that even in the face of arrogance, fear, and doubt, one could rise above and leave a lasting impression. And though she remained humble, continuing her work at the restaurant and playing music with the same quiet passion, she knew that the world had seen her true potential. Her story was no longer just about one night, one performance, or one wealthy man's misjudgment. It was about discovering strength within oneself, facing challenges with courage, and embracing the opportunities that come when talent meets determination. As she walked home that evening, the soft glow of streetlights reflecting on the pavement, she felt a sense of peace. She had faced fear and mockery, transformed it into admiration and opportunity, and emerged stronger than ever. Her piano had become more than an instrument. It was a symbol of her resilience, her courage, and her ability to inspire. She knew that no matter what challenges lay ahead, she could face them with the same strength and grace she had discovered that unforgettable night. The young waitress had learned a powerful truth: that life often presents moments of doubt, challenge, or mockery, but within those moments lies the opportunity to shine. By trusting oneself, embracing one's talents, and approaching every obstacle with courage and humility, anyone can turn adversity into triumph. Her journey was a testament to that truth, a story of inspiration, resilience, and the quiet power of courage. And as she looked forward, knowing that music, opportunity, and life's challenges awaited her, she walked with confidence. She had faced the unexpected, risen above it, and created a path filled with possibility. That night had changed everything, not just in the restaurant, but in her life, her spirit, and the way she saw herself. The piano, her courage, and her talent had become her guiding light, and she would carry them forward, touching hearts and inspiring others wherever she went.